My background is actually anthropology, and I stepped afterwards. Well, first it was about consciousness research and religion, and then my professor died who was doing that, and so I had to change the topic. I went to the other paradigm, mainly materialism, so I did my master thesis at the most materialist guy that we had in our university. And then I stepped into philosophy of science, and meanwhile it was always consciousness research, always parallel to experience, and also very parallel to organizing institutes that would allow really people to come together and organize themselves. Therefore, I'm also speaking right now here for you for representing us Marcus Schmid and the Existential Consciousness Research. We have been working about half a year right now on different conversations. The main questions have been how we can bridge analytical psychology and quantum processes, so how we can think this together. We had the same philosophical background during that time. It was Dr. Peter, we'll talk about more about that. So he couldn't come, unfortunately, so I do my best. Actually, it's not going to be 100% as Marcus Schmid would do it, because his background is physics, so my background is humanities, and so all the numbers that he has in his presentations are left out, but I can forward you this. So he's also written some articles on that, so if you want, you just write me and I can forward you this. Well, the whole question and what we have been talking about, criticizing, was this binary code of be and not to be, as Shakespeare put it in his words. That is, as we have all our computers based on 0 and 1. This is always the binary code that makes us think that things are wrong or things are right. So this is actually a lecture on how we can think complementarity. There's a real deep meaning to that it is something and it is something not. If we see these pictures, you might know them, so you can see it's on the right hand side, you can see an old woman, but you can see also a young woman, but you have to skip your mind. But you can't see it on the same time. You know? There had to be a time in between. Can you see the woman? Yes. Yeah. Perfect. So the crucial point about that is we have two values in here, but actually we have time in between to change between these two points of view. The question that always comes around is with reduction and materialist and stuff like that. It is like Mullah Nasruddin that lost his keys and he's like scrambling under a lamp of light, and someone passes by and asks him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm searching my keys." And they join searching and they can't find the keys. To someone said, "But where did you lost it?" And he said, "Well, in front of my door." "But we're searching here." "Well, because here we have light." So there's a bit more to change the spot of light to somewhere else where always shadow appears. This is actually about good. The basic question in which everything else depends is no longer the classical question of the essence of being, from which all being emerges, but the question about negativity that has not yet been overcome by any being. That's the philosophical question of the future. So I put it in my words, very precise, very short. The negation does not exist. So that's a paradox, because it's written there, you know. But as time goes by, it exists, but it says it doesn't exist. So if we make it a bit mechanical, it's like the one comes to two, comes to one. But we get closer to it. Negation actually is a philosophical term of the inversion by reflection. So the question arises how we can think a symmetry of time and the two-valued logic. How we can think evolution and eternity, which is also the bridge between science and religion. And how we can think the volition and cognition, and consciousness of the self, which means analytical psychology. So basically it's about on what fundament can we exist towards a holistic consciousness in science, but also in practice. So there are several holistic concepts that are here, can be only bridged by complementarity. And we have this classical way of thinking a long time ago. We have these two values, being and not being, or in philosophy is it being and thinking about the being. And therefore we have in mathematics, real number, quantitative numbers, whatever. That's the realm of Marcus Moore, so he's a mathematician, we could say closely. So, and we have the classical Newton's physics on that we can describe only objective things in terms of what are Günther irreflexive systems. Therefore consciousness is a nothingness, negative thing of being, therefore an epiphenomenon. And this leads to the ontology, the thinking, the being is congruent with the being, which means that everything that we can think is absolute to everything that is, which makes subject and object congruent as equal, which is actually not very logical because it's in the case. Two things happened that challenged this two-value logic. First was quantum physics and analytical psychology. And here we go for another paradox, the observer and the observed, consciousness and the unconscious process. Therefore our aim was to think these two things together, because these are the most challenging parts to overcome the two-valued logic, which makes a holistic being possible. So the answers are short, given by that. Complementarity is one answer, but we elaborate it further. And the other one is the process of being in the world, which means that we have to think in terms also of time. And time means be in the world. So the tradition of reflection in philosophy has been going from Kant to Fichte to Hegel and to Gotthold Günther. Gotthold Günther is a German philosopher that is widely unknown. The consciousness is constituted, the self-consciousness is constituted as a reflection of a reflection. And he was criticizing the two-valued logic of being, not being, of true force, the Aristotelian logic that there can't only be something, therefore there must be something not. And tertium non datur, the axiom which tells you there is no third. You know? These are the axioms of the philosophy of Aristotle. But if we come to think of that actually our subjective experience, what we experience subjectively, has never been that's what is objective. There's no congruent in between, but there's always a space left behind. That is why also my interpretation of the word I had together with Marcus is not the same. There's like space in between. That's also the reason why we have different opinions, perspectives, and whatever, because as a subject and an object experience, even if I experience you as an object, as a body, you know, I have my subject experience, but you have yours, and it's not congruent. It's not the same. There's something in between. He made a very logical, formal way of philosophy by introducing this third. The third, to him, is actually how he could make sense about the subject, because reflection is what we experience as being here, because there's object and the subject. But the subject of itself is a reflection of this reflection. So it's like kind of double reflection, we call it. and the object itself is the irreflexible. So there are some people that took up this knowledge, especially from system science, for example, also Laszlo. And if we come to think of one event, for example, having last night dinner at the restaurant, having pizza. So you have a certain image in your mind. And this event you can reflect upon from this event right now here, and you make a difference in between. And therefore you got something that is in the past, which makes also a future possible. If you take this together as a unit, and you reflect on this, on yourself, you get a subject, what you might call the I, which also makes an environment. So you have the I and the environment. To put these two axes together was much about the Pauli and Young dialogue. Pauli was the quantum physics, Carl Jung was an analytical psychologist. So they had always like these two axes where they could agree that there is complementarity to it, because there is nothing conscious about that. There is not unconscious. There's actually what I call here spirit. It's the German word Geist that we had before, because Geist in German goes to spirit and mind. But spirit means here the collective antipode to matter. So it's not the mind that it's individual, but it's collective one. So we have these four fields in different axes, and one axis is actually the objective one, and the other one is the subjective one. On these numbers, you also have to ask Jean-Jacques on his lecture tomorrow. But Marcus really did it on the mathematical side, on the physical side. I cannot talk about that. So actually, we have also this complementary side of cognition and volition. So there has been always the argues, what is life? Is it about cognition, so it's determined, or is it free will? So we have free will, we have volition. And one thing is actually the actual, and the other one is the potential, which is basically what also Harald Wallach puts in his general quantum theory on a different way, but you can find it here. So if you don't think it as an argument to discuss it one against another, but you think it as something complementarity, you have to put yourself in this third position that you have the both of the argument contradicting things together. In here actually is everything condensed what we found out. When there has been a huge process of talking with philosophers, with other scientists to come up with this, we came up with this structure which Marcus called the orthogonal complementarity. Because on one hand, it's not only one complementarity, there are two complementarities where they are complementary to each other. So we have like a double complementarity to get along with all these paradoxes that we find in the history of philosophy. And we have actually the thirdness, which is the point in the middle, which is the now and the here and now, which makes again a very important step in an integrated philosophy, because it's not ourselves looking at something, but we position ourselves in the center of our model, in the here and now. So, and if you look at the right hand side, we have the time axis to the left, we have the past, to the left we have the actual, the conscious, we have the right hand side, the potential, the unconscious, we have above what is the spirit and the meaningless information. That is first, meaningless information, because meaningful information is a higher complexity. And you have above matter, the substance. So on this axis you have the space axis. So you have time axis and you have the space axis. And if you come to have what Federico Fagin said, the qualia, which we found out that between these four elements we can configure the four psychological functions of Carl Jung, which are on the left. Above is the sensation, we have the feeling between the matter and the unconscious. Between the unconscious and the spirit, we have the intuition. Between the spirit and the conscious, we have the thinking. Between the conscious and the matter, we have the sensation. Actually, it's not in between, but it is the two values which overlap in this. And when we come to a third one, where we have three overlaps, we have on the top of this triangle, we have the logos, we have on the right, we have the chaos, on down we have eros, and left we have cosmos. And these are also very related to quantum observations, where the actual becomes a strong quantum observation. On the unconscious side becomes a weak quantum observation. We have like a wave function, but it's the weak one, which Atmasbacher was looking for, and also Maribana. And we have, there's a very different subjects and discipline in this, because if you go to matter, you have the body techniques above, you have on the right hand side the archetypes, we have and also trance techniques, altered states. We have above the science, literature, the mind, the talking, what we are doing right now. And we have on the left the weak quantum. And actually, in this four or two orthogonal complementarities, we could map a lot of things by not excluding one to the other, but put it in a place value system. So what we did was first going from the two values to the three values of Godapünte, but then we noticed that we have to make it on two complementarities, but actually the two complementarities arise as being also a freeness, but in the middle we have this process of being here now. In terms of reflection, because this is all based on the philosophy of reflection, this is the circle of matter. So if we make this whole process of this orthogonal complementarity, we go from, we have one value, and by the second value we have the reflection of matter. By the third value we have the two values where we have spirit. So in here we have the three values of Godapünte, where we can find the subjective, which is the double reflection, and the object, and in between the reflection itself. And we go on because there is no point break between this. It goes on because we introduce the first kind of process. But the reflection on the mind provokes the unconscious. That is why we were heading with the unconscious back when analytical psychology came out, and the reflection on the unconscious provoked the consciousness. That's why we are here now, to think about the unconscious. So that was way about 500 years of science. The twofold logic to get a reflection on matter, you have the threefold logic to get the reflection on spirit, you have the fourfold logic to get a reflection on unconsciousness, and the fourth one goes back to the one to have a reflection on consciousness. But in between, you have two other reflections that are basically the reflections of two complementarities. So this fourfold logic becomes a six value system. That could be also described like that. We figured out how this six relation work to another. So this is, and have different depths of reflections, because you have one depth from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. You have two depths from 1 to 3, from 2 to 4, and you have one with three depths, which is from 1 to 4. And this correlates with different complementarities and also relevance to quantum physics and analytical psychology. So basically, we have On the corners, we have two value systems, and on the cross, we have a three-value system, but only by one, and in the middle we have like a double one. But the problem becomes now that by a two-dimensional description of these layers, okay, we'll skip that the middle keeps on being empty because you have two values that lapse each other because of the complementarity, but they don't touch each other. So a third dimension has to be introduced, which is six-value system, or you make it by three-dimensional cubes. So just by the logic of reflection, we came from the 3 to the 4 to the 6. I was working on the presentation for Marcus before because he asked me to help him. He was very busy. And I came up with this problem and had like this, then we have like a cube which is based on 6 cubes, which constitute the 7th cube in the middle, but the 7th is not really there. So it becomes very common at that point. So this whole thing you can go and on. So we are in the middle of this process, it's not ready, because also Marcus had another urge to come to go from the 2 to the 3 to the 4, but actually it is going on another angle. Now I speak as an anthropologist, because as an anthropologist I'm always concerned that people might understand, or people understand each other. That opened up also a kind of firmness which was brought by the semiotics of some peers. Some peers, that was also Fagin was saying, we have the thing, the object, we have the interpreter, and we have the sign in the middle. You know? So there is always the process of interpretation, of understanding to make something meaningful, or comprehension out of our perception, which is a higher order as a two-value logic, because at least it needs 3 values. If we want to make a real consciousness research, we have to put ourselves in the middle of that, because we have to make an integrated philosophy, which is really practical. So the signifier by some peers are ourselves. And most important to all of this is that we have to include meaning to all of that, because there's a difference between holy water to water, there's a difference between sex and love. And how you get this? So on one hand, it is so important to look holistically to things, because living things are holistically. If you put a whole system in its parts, you're actually going to destroy it if it's a living thing. You know, if you have a body and you put things apart to discover, oh, what is it? You know, what most of the minds do when they do experiments, they take only parts of the things we're going to explain for the whole. But if you put it apart, it's not a living system anymore. So, living systems has been holistic systems, and holistic systems we have always in traditional medicine systems, for example. So my aim, on one hand, is to make proper research to have like an objectified reason to see what is the combination between elements, its proportions, to the meaning that it has actually on the body, because the body is the very one value that we have of these 2 values, but the meaning makes it to be free. So if we want to make consciousness research, we have also to look into the meaning of the body, and we want to have a science which goes beyond. We have to put ourselves in the middle of that, which means to put our body in our place, in our time itself, by discovering the process of being in the world and what does it mean. And actually, what does it mean to be in a relation with all of you? This is another concept which should be introduced into that, because it comes from the very philosophical side and phenomenology side. Because we have always these paradoxes between the sensations and the thinking, for example, which can be always bridged by our pure awareness. We have the dialectical or paradoxical thing about our psyche and our biographical unconsciousness, which can be overcome by the insight we have of our past traumas, whatever patterns of behavior. So we have also this paradox of the subject and object, which is always been bridged by the cognition or the reflection, as it is in terms of the philosophical reflexive traditions. And we have always this paradox between the organism to its environment, which I call it can be bridged by transpersonal cognition, or what this is a good word to by trans-individuation or trans-consciousness. And in there we have everything, all, which is always on the other side nothing, so that side, which has been always bridged by, I call it transcendental cognition. And as we approach it, we can do it by cognition and observation. There are two sides of the same coin. But this is actually a model for a phenomenological one. And if you have two people, this is what it can look like if someone of you is one of these things and the other one is me. So it can look like, because if we have sensation and thinking, they are not on the same place, they are not congruent. You know? But if we have like the subject, okay, we can share a kind of subject, but not everything. We share a kind of objective, and we share a kind of environment, but not everything. So it's always something left out, which is overbridged by the surface. So, and if we have many people that might be, for example, the person who is right on the left is from the right one, just the opposite. But they have the consciousness and being on. So these two concepts are to bring together the concepts of different traditional medical systems are to bring together. And we have to make it for a new century, probably by combining metaphors, combination, and therefore also computational means to get the meaning of the body by its numbers, by its relations, which are also emotions, sensations, thinking, intuition. We have time for questions.
This is a website we can go to and look at all those again.
In process.
Okay.
We have this website right now, but I promise till the end of the year we're gonna have everything there.
Okay.